The sky over the European forest was a restless canvas of gray and white, clouds churning like smoke from a distant fire. In 1944, it had been a battlefield of whispers and shadows, where the hum of engines and the distant crack of artillery were the lullabies of a world on the brink. Among the chaos, she flew, young, determined, a fighter pilot with a gaze that could pierce the horizon. Her name was Amelia Hart, though very few remembered it beyond her squadron. To them, she was fearless, almost untouchable, a comet streaking across a sky full of danger. But no one anticipated the silence that would follow. On that morning, Amelia had taken off with orders to scout enemy positions. The radio crackled with static and routine instructions, the kind every pilot learned to tune out. She responded with a clipped acknowledgement, her voice steady, betraying none of the storm churning inside her. Clouds enveloped her aircraft as she dove into enemy territory, the landscape below a patchwork of forests, rivers, and villages trembling under the weight of war. Moments later, her squadron lost contact. At first, it was assumed she had returned to base or been forced to divert, but as the hours stretched into days, fear gnawed at those who had known her. Amelia Hart had vanished, as if the sky itself had swallowed her whole. Search parties scoured the forest, the hills, and the rivers. Every wreckage, every sign of a crash, every whisper among the villagers brought hope, only to have it cruelly snatched away. The war pressed on indifferent, and the story of Amelia became a ghost story told in the barracks. The young pilot who had disappeared without a trace, leaving only questions that no one could answer. Families clung to memory, to letters she had written with meticulous care, words of courage and longing that now seemed unbearably fragile against the vast, uncaring sky. Decades passed. Her name faded from the headlines, but it never left the hearts of those who had flown beside her. 70 years later, a team of forest explorers stumbled across something remarkable. Moss had claimed it. Trees had grown around it. Yet there it was. The metallic frame of a fighter plane, abandoned yet almost pristine, as though it had been waiting all these decades for someone to find it. The forest held its secrets close, the underbrush whispering tales of the past. When the team cleared the last of the branches, the plane's fuselage reflected the winter sun, casting a ghostly glow that made the hairs on the back of their necks rise. Amelia's aircraft, thought lost to time and memory, had been lying in wait, frozen in an eternal, silent vigil. Inside the cockpit, the world seemed to pause. Rust had kissed the edges, and the leather seat had withstood the decay of decades, but it was clear that whoever had been here had never left. Instruments remained, frozen mid-flight, and a map still clung to the dashboard, the ink faded but legible. As the explorers documented the scene, a chill cut to the forest, the kind that feels like history breathing down your neck. How had the plane survived? How had Amelia vanished without leaving a trace, only for her plane to reemerge 70 years later in a forest that had grown wild around it? Each discovery only deepened the mystery. Personal items were found tucked in compartments, a locket, a journal, faded photographs, relics that spoke of a life interrupted. The pages of the journal, brittle yet preserved, revealed a voice that transcended time. Amelia's thoughts, fears, and dreams, etched in ink that had somehow survived the decades. She rode the sky of freedom, of duty, and of a strange premonition that this flight would not end like the others. Her words carried a weight, a haunting resonance, as if she had known the forest would become her final confidant. The explorers, reading each line, felt her presence like a whisper to the trees. A story paused, waiting for someone to understand. But the forest had its own story, one that refused to be told in plain terms. Evidence suggested she had landed, deliberately or by circumstance, in a clearing and then vanished. No human remains were found, no trace of struggle, no hint of what had happened to the young pilot. It was as though she had stepped out of her plane and into another world entirely. Scientists and historians debated, theorized, and argued, but the answer seemed perpetually out of reach. The more they studied, the more the mystery deepened. And yet, the emotional weight of the discovery that a life interrupted, a bravery frozen in time, made the forest pulse with a spectral energy that few could ignore. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the explorers moved carefully around the plane, their boots crunching softly against decades of fallen leaves. Sunlight filtered through branches, dust motes floating like tiny spirits above the fuselage. Each movement, each touch of metal felt sacred. The air itself seemed charged with memory, vibrating with the energy of a story paused mid-flight, a life frozen in the sky. No one spoke for long stretches, not because of caution, but because the weight of the moment demanded silence. Amelia Hart was not just a pilot. She was a ghost who had returned to the very machine that had carried her into oblivion. In the following days, experts from aviation history, archaeology, and even forensic science were brought to the site. Cameras recorded every angle, and sensors measured the decay and corrosion of the metal. Every finding raised more questions than answers. The plane's instruments were peculiar. They had stopped mid-flight, but not in a crash. The altimeter hovered at an impossible reading, and the fuel gauge indicated nearly a full tank. There were no skid marks, no gouges, no evidence of collision. It was as if the plane had been placed here intentionally, left to rest where only the trees would witness its secret. As word spread, local villagers came forward with fragments of memory, stories whispered from grandparents who had seen a plane disappear into the clouds all those decades ago. Some claimed to have glimpsed a lone figure walking into the forest at the time, though no one could describe her clearly. A girl, they said, tall, brave, flying like she belonged to the wind. The explorers listened with fascination, realizing that myth and history had merged into a single narrative. Amelia had vanished from human records, but had survived in memory, in rumor, and now, physically, through the plane. Meanwhile, the journal became a window into her mind. Amelia had written with precision, but also with an emotional honesty that startled anyone reading it. She spoke of fear not as weakness, but as companion, a shadow that sharpened her focus. She wrote of longing, not only for home, but for something undefined, something just beyond reach. Each page dripped with humanity, courage, and a sense of destiny intertwined with inevitability. One entry, in particular, sent a shiver through the team. She described a forest, dense and alive, claiming it would be where she would find her final peace. At the time, it sounded like metaphor, a poetic imagining in the heat of war. Now, decades later, it felt like prophecy. The plane's positioning in the clearing suggested an intentional landing, though why she never returned remained elusive. There were subtle signs, small handholds, footprints partially preserved under moss, that hinted at someone walking away, but they led nowhere. The forest, thick and impenetrable, seemed to have swallowed her entirely. Hypotheses arose. Had she been rescued by strangers? Had she found refuge in an abandoned cabin now lost to time? Or had something inexplicable, something beyond understanding, claimed her? The more they searched, the more impossible it became to ignore the forest's eerie aura, as if it had orchestrated the entire disappearance, keeping Amelia's fate its own secret. The emotional toll on those who had found the plane was profound. One historian, tears running down her cheeks, whispered into the cockpit, "We finally found you, but where were you all this time?" It was as though Amelia's presence lingered in the metal, in the moss, in the air itself. She had become not only a story of bravery and mystery, but a mirror, reflecting human obsession with understanding the unknown. People visiting the site left changed, haunted by the knowledge that history sometimes writes itself in shadows, and not even the most diligent records could capture everything. Night fell over the forest, and the plane transformed once again. Moonlight poured through the branches, illuminating the cockpit in silvery luminescence. Shadows shifted unnaturally, branches scraping softly against the fuselage like fingers reaching for a secret. The explorers dared not stay too long, but none could ignore the sensation that someone or something was watching. Cameras captured images that, upon review, revealed faint shapes near the tree-line, almost human, almost ethereal. Debate ensued. Optical illusions, trick of light, or a remnant of Amelia's spirit embedded in the forest itself. Whatever it was, it only deepened the mystery, leaving questions to linger long into the night. Yet it wasn't only the forest or the plane that demanded attention. Amelia's story resonated across generations. Letters she had written to her family were unearthed from archives, revealing a young woman fiercely committed to duty but aware of life's fragility. She spoke of dreams beyond the war, of seeing cities lit at night from the sky, a feeling the wind on her face like freedom itself. Those who read her words were struck by a duality. The courage of a soldier and the vulnerability of a dreamer, intertwined, inseparable. It became painfully clear why her disappearance struck such a deep chord. She represented a fleeting purity, a life snatched from ordinary time, leaving only wonder and heartbreak behind. The forest seemed alive at night, breathing in a rhythm that matched the heartbeats of those who dared to linger. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, carried weight, as though unseen eyes were cataloging their every move. The explorers had begun to notice strange patterns. The moss around the plane's landing gear appeared unnaturally flattened in precise arcs, as if someone or something had traced deliberate circles. Instruments flickered in the moonlight, though the plane had long lost its power. Shadows stretched in impossible angles, whispering across the canopy, like a language no one could understand. Every step deeper into the clearing felt like a descent into a story that had been waiting 70 years to be told. The journal, once a window into Amelia's mind, now seemed almost a conduit. One entry, written the night before her final flight, described a voice in the trees that guided her. At first, it seemed metaphorical, the imaginings of a young pilot alone in the sky. But the explorer began to hear faint echoes as they read, whispers that didn't belong to the wind, soft murmurs that rose and fell in cadence with the words on the page. Their rational minds rejected it, insisted it was imagination, yet the sensation grew subtle and insistent. The forest was no longer just a setting. It had become an entity, a silent narrator of Amelia's fate, and perhaps her captor. Local historians came forward with old tales. They spoke of disappearances, of soldiers and travelers who had entered the forest during the war and never returned. Parents warned children not to wander its depths, and villagers whispered about the ones who fly beyond sight, a name given to souls that had been claimed by the forest and never released. No one knew if these were myths born of fear or fragments of truth, but standing before the plane, the explorers understood the gravity of these warnings. Amelia's disappearance was no longer an isolated event. It was part of a rhythm, a pattern that defied explanation, echoing across decades like a pulse of unfinished stories. Days blurred into nights as the team documented every angle of the plane. One of them, a young photographer, captured an image in which the plane's canopy appeared to reflect not the clearing, but a different sky entirely. A twilight filled with clouds that moved like liquid, and a faint silhouette of a figure standing beside the cockpit. The figure was too faint to identify, yet unmistakably human. The photographer shivered as he showed the images to the others. No one spoke for several minutes. The forest was silent, but the tension pressed down like a physical weight. It was as if Amelia herself was observing, waiting, testing. The deeper they investigated the cockpit, the more unnerving details emerged. Personal items, letters, a pencil, a worn map, were still arranged as though recently touched, despite decades of abandonment. A small photograph, pinned under a corner of the dashboard, showed a young Amelia with her squadron, smiling in a way that seemed impossibly alive. Her eyes in the photograph seemed to follow the explorers as they moved, haunting them with the impossible notion that she was still present, not in body, but in something else entirely. Some dared to say aloud what they felt in the dark, that she had never truly left the forest, that in some way she had become part of it, her spirit entwined with the moss, the trees, the very air. Night after night, strange occurrences intensified. Radios in the team's camp would flicker to life with static, voices faintly calling Amelia's name. Tools moved ever so slightly when no one was near, and compasses spun erratically, defying logic. One explorer reported feeling a cold hand brush against her shoulder, though no one was behind her. Rational explanations were exhausted, and a creeping dread settled into the group. The forest was no longer merely a place. They understood it as a guardian of a secret too profound for ordinary comprehension. Amelia's plane had been a marker, a message, a signal to those who could perceive beyond the ordinary. Amelia's journal hinted at a choice she had made, one her contemporaries could never have understood. She wrote of a threshold in the trees, a boundary beyond which the world of war, death, and chaos could not follow her. Her words suggested she had intended to disappear, to leave behind the human world entirely. The plane had carried her to that point, and the forest had claimed her as its own. The explorers felt a mixture of awe and sorrow. She had survived, yet not in any way they could measure or understand. She had transcended the ordinary constraints of time and space, leaving behind only traces, hints, and the echo of her courage. By the end of the second week, the forest had become a character in its own right, silent, enigmatic, and all-seeing. The explorers began to realize that the story they were unraveling was not about a missing pilot, but about the human need to comprehend the incomprehensible. Amelia Hart's disappearance, the intact plane, the preserved journal, the whispers in the night, all of it existed in a liminal space where history, myth, and reality blurred. To some, she was lost. To others, she had become eternal, a sentinel of the skies, a ghost who refused to fade. The forest waited patiently, its secrets intact, as though the world had caught up just enough to glimpse, but never fully possess, the story it had been safeguarding for 70 years. The wind shifted that morning, brushing through the trees like a sigh that had waited 70 years to escape. The explorers returned to the plain, their boots sinking into layers of moss and frost, each step heavy with anticipation and an unspoken fear. Overnight, the forest had grown colder, shadows longer, as though it too had been holding its breath. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed hushed, their song swallowed by the oppressive canopy. The plain glinted faintly under the dim winter sun, as if beckoning them closer. The air smelled of wet earth, old leaves, and something else, something metallic, faint, almost alive. Inside the cockpit, every detail now felt laden with meaning. Amelia's journal lay open on the dashboard, pages fluttering despite the stillness of the air. A single entry stood out, scrawled in ink that had survived the decades almost miraculously. She had written of a choice. There's a place beyond the war, beyond death, where the sky is mine alone. I do not fear what waits. I choose to go. The words struck the team with a chilling clarity. Amelia had not vanished by accident. She had made a conscious decision. But why and where? The forest seemed to hum with the answer, though it refused to articulate it. One of the explorers, a historian specializing in wartime aviation, pressed a gloved hand against the fuselage and shivered. The metal felt warm, impossibly warm, and a soft vibration thrummed beneath her fingertips. It was subtle, like the heartbeat of the forest itself, yet undeniable. Another team member, the photographer, snapped a picture, the flash illuminating the cockpit for a brief second, and froze. In the photograph, a faint figure appeared behind the pilot's seat, indistinct but unmistakably human. Her features were obscured, yet the posture, the tilt of the head, the calm presence, it was Amelia, alive yet not. The team exchanged glances, unease curling to their chests like smoke. The journal offered cryptic guidance. Amelia wrote of a glade, hidden deep within the forest, where the ground shimmered under moonlight, where the trees formed a perfect circle, and where the air was lighter than breathing, heavier than time. Following her directions felt absurd at first. How could a forest leave such precise instructions across decades? But instinct, or perhaps the forest itself, led them onward. Each step seemed measured, deliberate, as if the forest was guiding them to the final scene of the story it had been writing for 70 years. Every branch, every root, every mist-laden clearing felt alive, attentive, expectant. And then they saw it. The glade appeared almost impossibly perfect, bathed in a strange light that seemed neither sun nor moon. Snow and moss combined to form a tapestry that muffled sound, and the air shimmered with a faint golden haze. There at the center lay a faint outline of a figure, seated, hands resting on knees, head tilted upward as if in communion with something beyond the forest. The explorers froze. Amelia Hart, or what remained of her, she radiated an ethereal glow, a presence that was both human and something else. The trees seemed to bend slightly toward her, leaves rustling in reverence. The wind carried a whisper, soft but distinct. I chose this. The sky is mine. Time itself seemed to distort. Moments stretched, contracted, until past, present, and future intertwined. The plain, now visible from the edge of the glade, appeared ordinary, yet its stillness was profound, as though it were a vessel of memory rather than metal. The explorers approached cautiously, hearts pounding, aware that whatever they were witnessing was beyond understanding. Amelia's journal trembled in the wind, pages flipping to a final entry they had not noticed before. If anyone finds this, know that I did not vanish. I became part of something greater, something unbound. The sky and the forest will remember me, and that will be enough. No one spoke. The air felt charged, thick with awe and sorrow. It was as if the forest itself had orchestrated a reunion, a revelation decades in the making. Amelia had not been lost, not in the sense they understood. She had transcended, leaving the human world behind, yet leaving a trace, a story, a plane, and a journal that bridged the gap between memory and eternity. The explorers could only watch, hearts heavy with wonder, as the light around her seemed to pulse in rhythm with the plane, the trees, and the wind. It was a harmony that defied comprehension, an unspoken acknowledgement that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only felt. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the glade seemed to sigh, settling back into quietude. Amelia's figure faded, not disappearing entirely, but blending into forest as though she had always been part of it. The explorers returned to plane, documenting every final detail, aware that they had witnessed a story that would haunt them forever. The forest, having delivered its revelation, returned to its usual silence, leaves rustling softly as if in contentment. They knew, in a way words could never capture, that Amelia Hart had flown farther than anyone could measure, beyond war, beyond fear, beyond mortality. And yet, the forest held one last secret. At the edge of the glade, barely visible beneath the moss and snow, a small handprint remained pressed into the earth, impossibly tiny, impossibly human, yet impossibly enduring. It was a signature, a message for those who came seeking answers. I was here. I chose this. And now you know my story. The news of the discovery spread like wildfire, though no headline could capture the gravity of what had been found. Amelia Hart's plane, frozen in time for 70 years, became a symbol, not just of courage, but the enigma of human endeavor, of the unknown, and of the mysteries the world refuses to release. Scientists and historians flocked to the site, documenting, photographing, cataloging, and debating, yet each new theory only seemed to deepen the legend. No one could explain the intact state of the plane, the whispers in the forest, or the faint traces of a presence that defied reason. The story grew, not just in newspapers, but in imagination, in the way people whisper her name in reverence, a ghost of history walking again among them. The explorers who first found the plane could not return to normal life. Each carried an invisible weight, a lingering awareness that they had brushed against something beyond understanding. Some awoke in the middle of the night, hearing faint echoes of engine hums or the soft murmur of wine through the cockpit. Others dreamed of Amelia, flying silently above forests, waving with that small, knowing smile that spoke of freedom they could not reach. Rational minds struggled to reconcile these experiences, but one truth remained undeniable. Amelia Hart was not gone. She had vanished from the world they knew, yet persisted in ways that defied explanation, a presence woven into the very fabric of the forest she had chosen. The plane was eventually moved to a museum, a place of reverence rather than exhibition. Crowds gathered, eyes wide, imagining the courage it had taken for a young woman to fly into the unknown. Visitors lingered, captivated not only by the aircraft itself, but by the story etched into every inch of metal and leather. The journal accompanied it, displayed in a glass case, pages frozen mid-thought, as if Amelia's hand had just left them moments ago. People would read her words and feel the pulse of her heart, the whisper of the wind she had chased, the longing for skies that belonged only to her. For those who visited, it became more than history. It became a meditation on choice, on bravery, and on the limits of human understanding. Yet the forest retained its secrets. Those who visited the site reported strange phenomena, shadows moving where no one stood, faint humming in the wind, impressions in the snow that appeared overnight. Some claimed to have glimpsed her figure, fleeting and ethereal, standing beside the plane or in the trees beyond. Others dismissed these accounts, chalking them up to imagination, grief, or the way memory plays tricks when confronted with wonder. But those who had been there, those who had felt the weight of decades pressing down among the trees, knew better. The forest had claimed Amelia, yes, but it also preserved her, a guardian of a story too vast and mysterious to fit neatly into human understanding. Historians and writers tried to piece together her life, but Amelia resisted full comprehension. She became a symbol, a story told at firesides and in classrooms, in museums and documentaries. Yet the story retained its unresolved tension because Amelia herself had left it that way. She had chosen to step beyond the boundaries of ordinary life, leaving only fragments, a plane, a journal, footprints, whispers in the wind. The forest, patient and silent, continued to hold the ultimate answer, invisible yet omnipresent. A reminder that some mysteries are meant not to be solved, but to be felt. The explorers often returned, drawn back by a combination of reverence and obsession. Each visit revealed new subtle details. Frost patterns that resembled wings, shadows in the canopy that aligned with the plane's fuselage, a faint echo of engine hum when the wind shifted. Each sighting, each sound, seemed to affirm what the journal had always implied, that Amelia had not vanished, that she had transcended, and that the forest had become a living monument to her courage and choice. They documented what they could. But increasingly, they understood that the story's essence existed only in the space between what could be measured and what could be felt. Families of Amelia Hart, long resigned to her loss, finally received closure of a sort that no one could have anticipated. Her niece, holding the journal in trembling hands, wept silently, tracing the words with fingers she could barely comprehend. She chose this, she whispered, as if speaking aloud made the choice tangible. She chose the sky. Across generations, the tale inspired courage, reverence, and an almost mystical respect for the human spirit, and for the unknowable mysteries of the world that we inhabit but never fully control. The forest remained, timeless and vigilant, holding her story in the rustle of every leaf, the bend of every branch, the hush of the undergrowth. Amelia Hart, the young pilot who had vanished in 1944, had become more than human memory. She had become a presence, a guide, a hauntingly beautiful testament to choice, courage, and the quiet power of the unknown. The plane, preserved and admired, could never fully capture what she had become. And for those who truly listened, the wind through the trees whispered a final, haunting truth. She is still flying. Even months later, the forest refused to release its hold. The explorers who had first discovered the plane returned repeatedly. Drawn by a compulsion they could neither name nor resist. The paths they had taken seemed different each time, twisted and reshaped by an invisible hand, yet somehow familiar. Snow and moss shifted overnight as if the forest was rearranging itself, creating corridors and clearings that only made sense to those it had chosen to guide. One night, as a low fog settled over the glade, the team could swear they heard the faint thrum of a propeller, soft, distant, echoing through the trees. No engine had moved in decades, yet the sound was undeniable, vibrating to the soles of their boots and into their bones. Inside the cockpit, subtle changes began to appear. Instruments that had once been frozen mid-flight now seemed to pulse faintly, needles trembling almost imperceptibly. The compass swung slowly, as though responding to something beyond magnetic fields. The map on the dashboard, yellowed and fragile, appeared to have new markings, tiny scratches that aligned with no known route, leading deeper into forest. The explorers debated whether they were seeing reality or hallucination, yet each one felt the same uncanny certainty. The plane was alive, or at least connected to something alive, something that existed outside ordinary time. Amelia's journal, always the anchor of reason, now seemed like a living document. Pages that had been static fluttered in the windless air, opening to passages no one remembered. One entry described a strange sensation. The trees know me. They bend without sound. The wind whispers my name, guiding me toward what must be. I am neither lost nor alone. The word struck the explorers like a revelation. They realized that Amelia had not simply disappeared. She had entered a pact with the forest, exchanging one reality for another, stepping into a dimension that respected neither human fear nor expectation. Each leaf, each shadow, each rustle was part of her presence, a silent testament to the choice she had made. As the days lengthened into weeks, the team began to experience phenomena that defied explanation. One night, one explorer awoke to find her tent door open, frost drifting in like a thin, spectral curtain. She could hear the soft brushing of fabric, faint footsteps on moss-covered ground. Yet no one was there. Another claimed to see a figure, luminous and human-shaped, walking toward the plane, then fading as if she had passed through a veil. The forest had become both stage and actor, orchestrating subtle performances that terrified and mesmerized the team in equal measure. Rational thought was insufficient. The only response was awe, tinged with deep, unshakable sorrow. Local villagers continued to share stories, old and new. They spoke of Amelia as if she were part of the landscape itself, a guardian spirit, a sentinel watching over the forest. Children who wandered too close claimed to hear the soft roar of engines overhead, or to see a figure standing on a ridge, hair and scarf whipping in the wind, smiling silently before vanishing. Even the most skeptical observers admitted a chill ran down their spines when recounting these tales. Amelia had become legend, yet legend alone could not contain the palpable, living presence that haunted the forest, the plain, and the people who dared to enter its depths. The team discovered one final clue, a detail so small it almost escaped notice. Beneath the cockpit, pressed into moss, was a faint indentation, a handprint, not large, not strong, but precise, deliberate. It matched the shape described in the journal. A signature of choice, a mark of consciousness, leaving behind a trace for those who could perceive it. One of the explorers knelt, tracing the contour with a gloved finger, feeling the texture of decades pressed into the earth. The handprint seemed to pulse faintly under her touch, as if acknowledging recognition. It was a reminder. Amelia had chosen this path, and the forest had honored her choice. By the time the team departed the forest for the last time, each felt irrevocably changed. The plane stood silently, instruments frozen once more, the glade bathed in a spectral twilight that refused to be captured by camera or memory. Amelia's presence lingered in every corner, in the rustle of branches, in the faint shimmer of frost and moss. The journal rested in their pack, its words heavier than paper could contain, whispering truths about courage, mortality, and the invisible threads that connect life to the unknown. No one spoke on the journey back. The silence was sacred, each absorbed in the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Even now, decades later, the forest continues to claim its secret. Visitors, drawn by curiosity or devotion, report subtle signs of her existence. A shadow glimpse of the tree-lean, a faint hum of engines when the wind is right, a sense of presence that cannot be measured. Amelia Hart, the young fighter pilot who vanished in 1944, had transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. She became eternal, a living story, a haunting whisper in the world. And the forest, patient, ancient, untamed, continued its vigil, guarding the secret of a girl who chose the sky, the unknown, and a destiny that belonged only to her. As the explorers lingered near the plane, the forest seemed to shift in imperceptible ways. Sunlight slanted differently through branches, shadows stretching unnaturally long, bending toward the fuselage as though in reverence. Even the wind behaved strangely, moving in loops and currents that defied logic, circling the clearing as though tracing invisible paths. The plane, still perfectly intact, seemed less like a relic and more like a sentinel, waiting patiently for the world to catch up to the story it held. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light felt intentional, as if the forest itself were breathing in unison with the memory of the pilot who had vanished into its depths. The journal became their guide, though it offered no straightforward answers. Amelia's entries hinted at thresholds, boundaries, places where the ordinary world blurred and folded into something extraordinary. One passage read, "Beyond the trees, beyond fear, the wind becomes mine. No one follows. No one waits. I am neither lost nor trapped. I am free." The words, so simple and precise, carried a weight that pressed against their very consciousness. As they read aloud, the forest seemed to respond, leaves quivering, branches creaking softly, an almost imperceptible vibration through the ground. It was a communion, subtle but undeniable, between the living and the eternal, between the forest and the girl who had chosen to step beyond it. Night fell quickly, dark and dense, yet illuminated with a faint shimmer of frost and moonlight reflecting off the plain. As they circled the cockpit one last time, the explorers noticed a change in the air itself. A gentle pulse, like a heartbeat, emanated from the fuselage. Instruments twitched ever so slightly, needles quivering as though aware of their presence. The compass spun slowly, then steadied, pointing toward the glade at the forest's heart, the place Amelia had described as her sanctuary. One of them reached to touch the plane's exterior, feeling a warmth that should not have been there, a sensation that transcended metal and time. It was alive, or something alive had left its essence within it. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared between the trees, faint at first, then intensifying into a luminous figure. The outline of a young woman, ethereal yet unmistakably human, hovered silently in the clearing. Her scarf and hair floated as though in a wind no one could feel. The explorers froze. There was no fear, only awe. Amelia Hart had returned, not as a girl they knew, but as a presence beyond the ordinary world. The glow radiated a quiet authority, a calm acceptance of existence beyond life, beyond war, beyond the chaos that had claimed so many. She raised a hand just slightly, and the wind whispered through the clearing, as if carrying her greeting. The forest itself seemed to respond, bending subtly, leaves rustling in unison, snow falling in delicate arcs. The plain, the glade, the trees, all became part of a single, living tableau. Time seemed to slow, stretch, and fold in on itself. The explorers understood then that they were witnesses to something profoundly eternal. Amelia had not disappeared. She had transformed, becoming inseparable from the forest and the sky she had always loved. The pulse they felt through the plain, the faint hum of engines that no longer existed, was the echo of her presence, a bridge between worlds. The explorers knelt in reverence, sensing that the story they had uncovered was not theirs to command, only to witness. They photographed, documented, and recorded as best they could, but every image, every note, felt insufficient. Amelia's story was lived in the space between sound and silence, light and shadow, presence and memory. And then, almost imperceptibly, she began to fade, dissolving into forest itself, leaving only the faintest outline, a whisper of wind, a pulse in the plain that lingered long after she was gone. When the team finally departed, the clearing remained. The plain stood silently among the moss and frost, as if guarding its secrets once again. The forest returned to its usual rhythm, though those who had been present sensed the lingering weight of what had transpired. The plain, the journal, and the faint traces of Amelia's presence became a testament, not to loss, but to choice, courage, and the possibility of stepping beyond the boundaries of the world we know. The story would be told, whispered, and remembered, yet some truths remain forever elusive, residing only in the pulse of the wind and the shimmer of the trees. Even years later, the forest continued to hum with quiet life. Visitors reported glimpses of a figure in the clearing, fleeting, luminous, a shadow that moved against the trees, as if scanning the horizon. The plain remained, untouched yet alive with memory, a monument not to war, but to freedom, to courage, and to the girl who had vanished only to become eternal. Amelia Hart had chosen the sky, and in doing so had become part of something far greater than human understanding. And somewhere, just beyond perception, she still flew, wings invisible, spirit unbound, forever haunting the forest she had claimed as her own. Years passed, yet the forest remained unchanged in its vigilance. Seasons shifted, snow melting into rain, sunlight streaming to the same towering trees, yet the clearing held its secret, frozen in time yet alive with invisible motion. Those who visited reported the same subtle signs, the faint hum of a long, silent engine, shadows that moved just beyond the edge of vision, and the unmistakable sense of being observed. The plain stood as a monument, untouched by decay, a vessel of memory and presence, while the moss and frost grew around it like reverent guardians. Amelia Hart had become both legend and presence, tangible and yet forever unreachable. The explorers who had first uncovered her story carried it with them for the rest of their lives. Dreams were haunted by the hum of engines and the soft rustle of leaves in a forest that existed simultaneously in reality and memory. Letters were written, documentaries produced, yet each attempt to capture the essence of what they had witnessed fell short. Amelia's story was not meant to be recorded fully. It existed in the fleeting, ungraspable space between history and myth, in the silent spaces where human comprehension faltered. It was a story lived as much as it was told. Visitors to the museum where the plane now rested felt its presence immediately. There was an unspoken tension, a subtle pull that drew attention to the cockpit, the worn leather, the journal frozen mid-thought. People would linger, compelled to read her words, to imagine her voice, to feel the courage and longing etched into every page. And then, sometimes in the softest hours of twilight, a whisper of wind would stir, brushing against a glass case or rustling the pages, a reminder that Amelia Hart had never truly left. She had chosen a different sky, a different reality, yet her story remained here, alive in those who came seeking it. Local villagers continued to share her story, passing it to children who would never see the plane but could feel its presence in the stories told around fires. The forest, meanwhile, remained a silent guardian. Travelers who dared to wander its depths spoke of glimpses of light between the trees, of fleeting figures hovering near the glade, and of the sense that some force watched over them, protective yet distant. Amelia had become inseparable from the forest, a living echo, a sentinel of courage, a reminder that bravery and choice can transcend mortality. Even the forest itself seemed aware of its role. Branches shifted in subtle patterns. Moss grew to frame the plain like a shrine, and the wind whispered in rhythms that defied reason. Some nights, explorers who returned alone reported hearing Amelia's voice, soft, melodic, a murmur of reassurance, guiding them through darkness and uncertainty. The plain, though still, seemed to pulse faintly in response, a heartbeat synchronized with something beyond the ordinary world. It was a communion of past and present, human and eternal, tangible and ineffable all at once. Amelia Hart's journal continued to speak to those who sought understanding. One passage, often cited by visitors and historians alike, captured the essence of her choice. I do not fear what waits beyond the trees. The sky is mine, the wind my companion, and the forest my witness. I leave this world behind, but it is not loss, it is freedom. Every word resonated with courage, longing, and acceptance. She had not fled, she had not vanished. She had stepped into a space beyond fear, beyond human expectation, and in doing so, had left behind a story that would echo through generations. The explorers often returned to forest, drawn not by curiosity, but by reverence. Each visit revealed new subtleties, frost patterns that seemed deliberate, faint sounds that could not be explained, shadows that moved in impossible synchrony with memory. They understood that Amelia's presence was eternal, not just in the forest, not just in the plain, but in the very act of remembering. The story had become a bridge, a conduit between the human heart and something infinitely larger, a tale of choice, courage, and the haunting beauty of stepping beyond the known. And so, Amelia Hart's legacy endures. The plane remains, the journal rests in glass, and the forest holds its secret. For those who listen closely, who watch carefully, and who step lightly upon the moss and frost, the echoes of her presence linger. The hum of engines, the whisper of wind, the soft, luminous figure glimpsed between the trees. She is gone and yet not gone, vanished yet eternal, a pilot who chose the sky, the unknown, and a destiny that belongs only to her. The story does not end. It continues in the pulse of the forest, the shimmer of the plain, and the hearts of those who remember. One final visit drew the remaining explorers back to the forest, each step heavier than the last. The path had grown wild again, moss and roots obscuring the way, as though the forest had waited for this final communion. Snow crunched softly underfoot, leaves whispered against the wind, and the clearing where the plane rested seemed to hum faintly, alive in a rhythm they could feel in their chests. Time itself felt stretched, as though the forest existed in its own dimension, one where decades and centuries folded together, carrying the memory of Amelia Hart in every shadow. The plane gleamed faintly under a pale sun, untouched by decay, instruments frozen mid-flight, yet somehow pulsing with life. The journal lay atop the dashboard, pages slightly rustling in a windless stillness. As the explorers knelt, each could sense the presence before them. The weight of a life suspended, a choice made long ago, a courage that defied not only war, but time itself. The forest seemed to breathe in tandem, the trees bending subtly, snow settling gently in arcs that framed the glade like a cathedral. Here, Amelia Hart was present, not in flesh but in spirit, and in the echo of her choice. A soft glow appeared in the center of the clearing, faint at first, then intensified to reveal her form, luminous, ethereal, yet unmistakably human. Her gaze swept over the plain, the glade, the explorers, and then lifted to the sky she had always loved. The scarf around her neck fluttered in a wind no one felt, her hair rising as it suspended between worlds. She raised a hand slightly, a greeting, a benediction, a sign that she was still watching, still aware, still free. The explorers could feel it in their bones, a quiet, overwhelming serenity that left them speechless, hearts racing, eyes wide in awe. Amelia's journal, open before them, fluttered one final time. Pages turned with an unseen hand, revealing words that seemed written for this very moment. I am beyond the war, beyond fear, beyond the grasp of those who cannot follow. The sky is mine, the wind my companion, the forest my witness. I leave not in sorrow, but in triumph. Remember me, not as lost, but as free. A hush fell over the clearing, a silence so profound that it seemed to suspend the world itself. The explorers could only kneel, absorbing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The forest responded subtly, branches swaying in patterns that mimicked flight, leaves trembling like wings in a soft, invisible current. Frost sparkled in the pale light, outlining the plain and glade with a reverence that felt intentional. And then, almost imperceptibly, Amelia began to dissolve, her figure blending into the trees, the snow, the wind itself. Yet she did not vanish. She remained present in every breath of air, every pulse of energy, every echo of memory. The explorers understood then that her story had never truly ended. It had simply shifted, becoming a living testament to courage, choice, and the unknown. As they rose to leave, a single impression remained on the forest floor, a faint handprint, pressed delicately into moss and frost, perfectly preserved. It was her signature, a final reminder that she had been here, that she had chosen this path, and that the story was now theirs to honor. The explorers departed in silence, their minds and hearts forever marked, carrying the weight of a story that transcended ordinary understanding. In the years that followed, visitors to the site reported faint signs of her presence, a shimmer of light between the trees, a rustle of leaves in impossible patterns, the soft hum of an engine long gone. The plain and journal remained tangible markers of her existence, yet the forest held the truest proof, the pulse of life, memory, and choice that could never be fully explained. Amelia Hart had flown farther than any human could measure, beyond time, beyond fear, beyond the reach of mortality itself. And yet, for those who witnessed it, she remained profoundly present, eternally free, forever haunting the sky and the forest she had chosen as her own. Visitors and explorers alike would leave the forest changed, hearts heavy with awe, minds filled with wonder and a quiet, lingering sense of humility. Some whispered her name. Some never spoke, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of her choice. The forest, patient and eternal, watched over the clearing, the plain, and the story, knowing that the girl who vanished in 1944 had left behind a legacy that would endure for generations, a tale of courage, freedom, and the haunting beauty of stepping beyond the known. And in the stillness of the glade, if one listens closely, the faintest hum can still be heard. Engines whispering, wings cutting through the wind, a presence that is gone yet forever there. Amelia Hart is still flying. Years after discovery, the plain and the glade became pilgrimage sites for those drawn by the story. Historians, adventurers, and ordinary people arrived, each sensing that this was more than history, more than legend. The forest did not welcome them all equally. Some left shaken, uneasy, as if they had trespassed in a space that demanded reverence. Others reported sensations that defied explanation, a warmth on their shoulders, a whisper through the leaves, the faint hum of a long, silent engine. Those who listened carefully said they could feel her presence, a pulse in the ground, a heartbeat in the wind. Amelia Hart, alive not in flesh, but in essence. The explorers who had first uncovered the plain never returned to ordinary life entirely. The forest had changed them. Nights were haunted by dreams of flight, glades bathed in impossible light, and the sensation of invisible wings brushing their cheeks. Some would awake to find their homes filled with the scent of pine and frost, as if a fragment of the forest had followed them. The plain, the journal, the clearing, all had become a lens through which they viewed the world, a reminder of courage, freedom, and the mysterious boundaries between life and the unknown. They wrote accounts, gave lectures, shared photographs, but none of it could convey the fullness of what they had experienced. Amelia's story was not something to be contained. It existed in the spaces between words, between breaths, in the unseen currents of the world. Communities around the forest began to weave her presence into their own stories. Children were told the pilot who vanished yet remained, a guardian spirit of courage and possibility. Travelers passing near the clearing would sometimes glimpse a figure in the trees, fleeting and luminous, standing silently, watching, guiding. Some left offerings of flowers or letters tucked beneath the moss. Small tributes to the young woman who had chosen her path so long ago. The forest absorbed them all without judgment, preserving her story in its eternal vigilance, a secret that was both public and private, tangible and impossible to grasp fully. The plane, now in a museum, became a symbol of timeless bravery. Visitors would press their hands against the glass, imagining the hum of engines and the rush of wind, tracing the lines of the fuselage in the cockpit where Amelia had once sat. Her journal, displayed nearby, drew long lines of readers, each absorbing her words with reverence, imagining the thoughts and fears she had carried. Yet no photograph, no note, no recording could capture the essence of what she had become. A presence beyond time, a story that belonged to forest, the sky, and invisible currents connecting the two. Even the forest, seemingly still and silent to the untrained eye, held its own rhythms. Shadows moved in patterns that suggested flight. Frost sparkled in the glow of dawn like tiny constellations, and the soft rustled leaves carried whispers in cadence with long-forgotten engines. Pilgrims who walked the paths alone often reported a sense of calm, of being guided, of an invisible hand watching over them. Some spoke of feeling the pulse of life in the plane itself, a heartbeat aligned not with human time, but with the eternal rhythm of the forest. Amelia Hart had become more than a memory. She had become a force, a guardian, a story lived in the pulse of the world itself. The explorers returned to the glade one final time, older now, their faces etched with lines of experience, grief, and awe. They stood silently, letting the forest embrace them in its quiet presence. The plane gleamed faintly, untouched by decay, and the journal lay open on the dashboard, pages rustling with the faintest breeze. A glow appeared, subtle but unmistakable, a presence that floated in the center of the clearing. Amelia Hart, watching, serene, eternal. Her eyes swept over them, not with sadness, not with longing, but with quiet triumph. She had chosen this path, and in doing so, had created something greater than memory, a story that would endure, unbound by time, untouched by death. As they left, the clearing remained as it always had, timeless, sacred, alive. Frost sparkled in the sunlight. The trees whispered softly, and the plane waited patiently for the next generation to witness, to feel, to remember. Amelia Hart had flown beyond fear, beyond mortality, beyond the ordinary limits of human experience. And though she had vanished from the world they knew, she remained present in the pulse of the forest, the shimmer of the plane, and the hearts of those who carried her story. She was gone, yet eternal. She had chosen the sky, and she had become its whisper, its wings, its haunting presence that would never be forgotten. Decades had passed since the plane was discovered, yet the forest remained unchanged, or perhaps it had changed in ways imperceptible to the human eye. Each tree, each patch of moss, each curve of the clearing seemed imbued with subtle awareness, a consciousness that had grown around the presence of Amelia Hart. The explorers, now older, returned one last time, their boots sinking into decades of accumulated leaves and frost. The air was still heavy with memory, as if the forest had been waiting, patient and eternal, for this moment. The clearing shimmered faintly in the pale light, the plane gleaming as though freshly landed. Its instruments remained frozen mid-flight, yet seemed alive, thrumming softly under fingertips that dared to touch the metal. The journal lay open, pages fluttering without wind, revealing lines that none of them remembered reading before. The world waits for those who cannot see, but those who look with the heart may find me in the pulse of the wind, in the shimmer of the trees, in the hush of the snow. I am beyond, yet I am here. The word struck them profoundly. She had left a map, not a geography, but of presence, a way for the living to sense what she had become. As the explorers moved closer, the soft glow appeared again, ethereal yet tangible. Amelia Hart stood in the center of the glade, her form luminous, her gaze serene. She did not speak, yet her presence communicated everything: courage, freedom, choice, and the quiet triumph of transcending a world constrained by fear and mortality. The wind stirred, lifting her scarf and hair in a dance that seemed choreographed by some invisible hand, the forest itself bending subtly in acknowledgement. Every leaf, every branch, every frostflake seemed alive with intention, participating in the silent communion between past and present, human and eternal. The explorers knelt, hearts heavy with awe, understanding at last that this was the culmination of a story that had waited 70 years to be witnessed. Amelia had not vanished. She had transcended. The plane, the journal, the glade, and the forest were all part of her legacy, tangible signs of a choice that defied human logic. And yet, there was no sadness here, no despair, only reverence, a recognition of the extraordinary courage it took to step beyond fear and embrace the unknown. For a long while, none spoke. Time seemed to stretch, suspended in the hush of the forest. And then, as the sun shifted, a subtle change occurred. The glow around Amelia pulsed faintly, then began to dissolve, blending seamlessly with the light filtering through the trees. She was no longer a figure, no longer separate. She had become part of the wind, the branches, the snow, the pulse of the forest itself. The plane remained a silent sentinel, instruments frozen, yet carrying the weight of memory and presence. The journal rested atop the dashboard, its pages quivering gently as if breathing. The explorers rose slowly, feeling the full magnitude of what they had witnessed. They understood that the story of Amelia Hart was not meant to be contained, recorded, or fully explained. It existed in the liminal space between memory and myth, between history and the eternal. They left the glade with a profound sense of reverence, carrying not just a story, but an understanding of courage, freedom, and the beauty of stepping beyond the ordinary. Back in the world of ordinary time, people continued to hear whispers of the forest. Shadows shifted in impossible patterns. The wind hummed softly over the glade, and travelers reported fleeting glimpses of a figure that seemed human yet otherworldly. Amelia Hart's legacy lived not only in the plane and journal, but in the pulse of the forest itself, a presence that could not be measured or contained. She had flown beyond fear, beyond death, beyond comprehension, leaving behind a story to haunt, inspire, and awe anyone who came near. And somewhere, always, the faintest hum of propeller could be heard, the whisper of wings cutting through unseen currents. The explorers, the visitors, and those who believed in her story would recognize it. A voice, a pulse, a reminder that Amelia Hart had chosen the sky, and in doing so had become eternal. The forest lay still, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Shadows stretched long and thin, curling around the plane like protective arms. The air carried a subtle pulse, the heartbeat of something ancient, patient, eternal. Visitors, explorers, and pilgrims had long left the clearing, yet it felt alive, aware, waiting. The plane remained, its metal shining faintly, instruments frozen in time, carrying the weight of a story too vast to be captured by words alone. Every leaf, every branch, every inch of moss seemed to hold memory, a memory of courage, choice, and a life that had transcended ordinary bounds. Amelia Hart was everywhere and nowhere. She had become part of the wind that whispered through the trees, part of the frost that sparkled in dawnlight, part of the shadows that stretched over the plain. Her presence was a rhythm, subtle yet unmistakable, a pulse that could be felt by those who dare to truly see, truly feel. No photograph, no recording, no journal entry could fully contain her. She was a story lived, a story breathed into the very soul of the forest, the sky, and the air between them. The explorers, older now, returned one final time, not to uncover, but to witness. The clearing welcomed them like an old friend, silent yet alive. The plane gleamed faintly, the journal fluttered softly, and in the center of the glade, a faint glow shimmered. Amelia Hart's figure appeared, luminous and serene. Her eyes swept over them with quiet triumph, the softest hint of a smile on her lips. She had chosen this. Freedom, eternity, a life beyond fear. She had left behind a trace for those who would come after, not to understand fully, but to feel, to remember, to honor. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper that resonated deep in the chest. I am here. I have flown. I am free. And then slowly, she dissolved into the forest, the light blending seamlessly with the trees, the frost, and the air. The plane remained silent, eternal, a sentinel for her story. The journal lay atop the dashboard, its pages quivering gently, breathing in time with the pulse of the forest. Time resumed its ordinary flow, yet something had changed. The forest, the glade, the plain, and the explorers carried a secret, a story of courage, choice, and the haunting beauty of stepping beyond what is known. Even centuries from now, travelers may hear the soft hum of an engine that has not existed for decades. They may feel the brush of wings in the wind, or see a luminous figure at the edge of their vision, vanishing as quickly as it appears. They may never understand, yet they will remember. Amelia Hart had flown beyond the limits of the world, beyond mortality, beyond fear itself. And though she was gone from the world we inhabit, she remained eternal, a whisper in the wind, a pulse in the forest, a presence in the plain, and a story that could never be forgotten. Her legacy endures, not in monuments, not in headlines, not in textbooks, but in the quiet spaces between memory and imagination, in the rustle of leaves, in the shimmer of frost, in the hush of a forest that waits, always, for those who dare to look beyond the ordinary. Amelia Hart is still flying. She always will be.